fans.
All right.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah, I hope you can hear me. Okay, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. My name is AB Sam Thomas. I'm the editor-in-chief of Inc. Arabia. Been covering the MENA startup ecosystem for like nearly a decade, actually more than a decade, now that I realize how old I am. And I'm very glad to have this conversation about the maturing or the coming of age of the MENA's VC ecosystem with Noor and Islam. I'm not going straight into their describing their bios and stuff. You all have the app. Go and check out their bios now, and we're going to dive straight into the discussion. The one thing I would say is, like, when I do these kind of sessions, I want to make it as interactive as possible. And it's not just about interaction between us on stage, it's also with you guys and the audience. Unfortunately, we don't have a setup for audience questions, but I have found a way to work around it. Just send me a message on the Web Summit app. I will get your questions in as we go through the conversation. So yeah, just find me, AB Sam Thomas, on the Web Summit app. I'll get your questions in. Cool. All right, Noor. I'm going to start with you because the name of the session is called The Coming of Age of the MENA's VC ecosystem. And you just released a book called Coming of Age.
Did.
Let's talk about that. Like, just give us a state of affairs, so to speak. Where are we now, and how did we get here over the last 10 years?
I mean, I'll give a very brief one, and thank you all for joining us. Thank you for having me, and always a delight to be moderated by you, Abby. If I go too deep into it, then I'll give away the entire book. So I won't. I encourage you all to read the book.
Yep.
It is really about 3 different sections, if you will, is how I think about it. There's the part where we think through what is MENA, why is the region one block as far as we're concerned, what does it mean to be from the region, and who are the original founders. So we talked to 35 founders in order to really generate authentic journeys and the personal journeys in this book. And the first section, it talks to Ronaldo, who founded Souk, which became Amazon, and Modesser and Magnus that founded Kareem, which became Uber, and Michael Lahyani. And really, what was it like 20 years ago, 15 years ago, to try to build a startup in this part of the world? What was missing? And their reflections on what the hardest things were in the journey versus perhaps today. And then the second section of the book is really the coming of age, the last 5 or 7 years, which are about fintech, where you're in the book, and 4 other fintech founders and the journeys, and then health tech, and then you have agri-tech, ed tech, and supply chain tech. So the 5 sectors where we've seen a lot of pro-business or pro-entrepreneurship regulation, coupled with founders that are building great companies in this part of the world. And then the last section is really the future. So what is AI? What is crypto? What is energy? What is it for the region? Why are we positioned in a way that we can actually lead these technologies globally and looking forward? So it's a little bit of all of this. It's quite a bit of macroeconomic analysis and data, and then leveraging those stories with the personal stories of the founders, and then my personal kind of fortune to be listening to hundreds of pitches every month from amazing founders for the last 7 years, and the pattern recognition there. So that's the coming of age. I've been here in the region for 30 years and been fortunate and blessed to witness most of this from a front row seat, and this was just an opportunity to share some of the amazing journeys that these founders have had.
You can't reveal the book. I completely get it, but give us a summary. Give us
That was the summary.
Give us like an elevator pitch. Like, for people who have yet to be interested in the ecosystem, interested in this landscape, why does it matter, and what's your
What does it
take
matter?
on it? Yeah.
So the region, as I see it, MENA, is 450 million people. Half are under the age of 30. It's the youngest population in the world alongside sub-Saharan Africa, right? And so when we take a look at what does it mean when this population suddenly grows up and starts becoming productive members of the economy, comes into the workforce, wants to use the world's best technology to solve problems that apply to hundreds of millions of people. And then couple on top, or with that, and layer on top of it, the idea that for many of these industries, whether it's fintech, so fintech, we were 7 years ago, 85% unbanked. Now we're 51% unbanked. Nobody built banks. So when you start to think about that, and in healthcare, we have 1 doctor per 1,000 people. Europe has 4 doctors per 1,000 people. So if you come to the conviction we'll never have enough doctors, enough hospital beds, enough clinics, great. What can tech do to bridge that access to healthcare gap, that personalized medicine gap? We don't need to replace incumbent industries. Founders in this part of the world are in a position to create new best-in-class industries using technology without having to fight with the incumbents. So there's this opportunity to create, to leapfrog, to really do what's best for this really young population with really high adoption because everyone's young and happy to adopt tech. So that's where the big strength and advantage lies. And I think that's the key takeaway, is that this is not a disadvantage, it's such an advantage.
So you talk about creating industries out of nothing, and Islam, I really think you can talk to this. When you started out, like she rightly said, like the population was almost entirely unbanked, if you want to call it that, and we have gone by leaps and bounds there. Talk about that journey, about creating this industry out of nothing, creating this customer base out of nothing. And also, I also want to like really highlight, you started out in Egypt and you have like branched out to the region, you know, in Saudi, in the UAE, in Pakistan. Talk through that journey and yeah, how has it been?
100%. So first of all, so thankful to be with you here. So when we started, actually, and I always tell the story, we became part of the payment ecosystem by complete coincidence. We've never thought about building a payments company. We always knew that banks are there, banks are huge. Straight out of college, met my two other co-founders, and we were building an e-commerce platform, like an affiliate marketing platform on Facebook. And actually, we built it. We called it Social Tab. We went to the largest bank in Egypt, and we told them we want APIs and a payment gateway for pay-ins. We need to pay our influencers and affiliate marketeers. We need payout APIs. And the guy started laughing at me, and he said, I mean, this is not Silicon Valley, and we're not PayPal. So all what you need to do is pay a lot of money to set up. The integration guide was like a 300-page. The ecosystem or the payment landscape wasn't built for companies who are going digital. And I remember where I asked the manager of this bank, telling him like, how many merchants do you onboard a month? And he said, proudly, we're the largest bank and we onboard 6 merchants a month. And it hit me, like if we're bullish about digital economy, if we're seeing that here in Egypt and obviously in MENA, everyone is going to go digital, then we should be bullish about digital payments because it sits at the heart of this digital revolution. And that's why we pivoted from building an e-com play to building the infrastructure for SMBs to accept digital transactions, which is PayMob. Obviously, the landscape was extremely different. I mean, but without having like global ventures and VCs, it was very hard to raise capital. So we raised capital from a local VC called A15. We raised $100,000. We stayed with it for like 3 years, and then they topped it out to another $250,000, and we stayed for 5 years with $350,000. And then all of a sudden we wanted to scale, so we had to go to regional VCs. That is when we met Global. They were very fortunate to have them because they turbocharged us with obviously the funding and the expertise. They helped us grow, so now we operate in UAE, in Oman, in Saudi, and in Pakistan. The company grew from the 3 of us to actually we have almost 1,400 people across 6 offices. And only last year in Egypt, we've managed to digitize 0.5% of the Egyptian GDP went through our network throughout 350,000 SMBs in Egypt.
Applause, guys. Really, applause for that. Genuinely applause for that. So, quick question. Can you guys hear us? Is the mics, like, are you hearing us? Yes? Okay, cool. So, I want to bring up something you mentioned, Islam, and this is actually a question that came from the audience. Amity, you mentioned Silicon Valley, and this is a question that I get a lot. I'm sure you get it a lot too, Noor. Like, does the Silicon Valley model apply for the MENA region, if there is a specific model that applies for the MENA region? Or is there an alternative we should be talking about? So, Noor, I will pose it to you first.
I think it's an alternative. I think that, you know, to Islam's point, when you're thinking about Egypt or Saudi Arabia or many of these places, and you're thinking about your baqqala or your little SMEs, and, you know, layer on top of that the payment machines that you guys were replacing effectively. So those payment machines cost $300 or $400, which if you're sitting in Silicon Valley or in the US and you're saying, okay, most people have these, so then the question is, how do we improve them? $300 or $400 for a payment machine, not a big deal. People come in with their credit cards and they pay and it works, right? Yeah. If you're sitting in emerging markets, $300 or $400 is a lot of money. Yeah. Yeah. For a payment machine, for people to use credit cards, wait, people don't have credit cards. So the question in Silicon Valley is very different. How do I optimize this? How do I utilize this? How do I make this a little bit less expensive? How do I make more people use it, incentivize them? The question in emerging markets or the global south is, how do I enable digital payments when the SMEs can't afford the digital machine and the payers don't have credit cards?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you're solving a completely different problem. And the irony is that this problem, the one of Global South, applies to over 6 billion people. Right? The first one applies to about a billion, right? US, Europe, and maybe some other countries here and there. China solved it differently. China solved it the Chinese way. In Kenya, you had M-Pesa solved it a different way.
Yeah.
So when we take a look at MENA, what is our way? So yes, I think it's a different problem you're solving.
Islam, again, kind of like adding to this question, like when we talk about what works as a model for entrepreneurs, for startups, what's your take on that situation? Like,
Well-
how do you decide like what works in terms of like operation model, lots of VC capital, like, yeah, what's the balance you find?
So 100%. So to Noor's
Yeah,
point,
just-
I mean, copying something from the valley would never work. Obviously, the business models itself are there, but in order to do like a business that has been successful in the U.S. and bringing it same as here, I don't think it will work. So for us, I mean, obviously, when we started, people were saying, yes, we don't have cards. But they have something. So we realized they have wallets because wallets in Egypt are becoming extremely prevalent. So we said, why don't we build a payment infrastructure that doesn't only accept cards, it can accept payment, it can accept wallets. And then step by step, because of the devaluation in Egypt, for instance, and because of the lack of credit cards, there emerged buy now, pay later. So we said, why don't we enable this as well? So I think for a founder to be always looking for the differentiator and not throwing money at problem, because we didn't have a lot of money, so we need to create value. Unfortunately, over the last 3 years, a lot of founders were like selling $1 for 80 cents, and they were so happy that they're selling a lot of dollars. And then obviously you've seen what happened. So I think having like being strict with the value proposition, waiting before you invest a lot of time in like or blitz scaling, you need to take a lot of time to just reach this product market fit. So it took us like 5 years to reach to the product that we think people would need. And then, so it took us 5 years to reach 1,000 merchants. And then it took us 2 years to reach 75,000 merchants. So
Yeah.
this is when we realized, oh, it's working. People want to pay for this, and the economics works, because to Noor's point is very important. I mean, having the same infrastructure like in the US, especially in payments, is very costly. Especially for SMEs, they cannot actually pay for $300 or $400, and the economics doesn't make sense. So you need to figure out some new, innovative, low-cost ways to be able to perform.
Thank you, Amity, for that question. But to your point about infrastructure, and again, this is coming from an audience member called Amani. We talked about infrastructure. What about the regulatory landscape? So this person is asking about like AI startups in the healthcare industry. Can you talk about like how fast, how quick are regulations changing, both in your aspect, like given your experience, and again, Noor, I'll come back to you for that.
So I'll speak about the fintech. So our regulator is always the central bank, and the central bank, I mean, is responsible for the economy and all of our wealth. So I give them an excuse to be a bit slow, but obviously they're very conservative. My approach was always going to the central bank, being extremely transparent with them, taking the time to explain to them what we want to do. In most cases, I see central bank are very excited about what we're doing, because again, people who work at the central bank, they have mandates like us, they have targets. So if you align yourself with these targets, obviously they're going to help you, and you're going to be top on their list. But sometimes people think of the way that I want to be successful is that I want to disrupt. And I don't think these industries are looking for disruption as much as they're looking to actually expedite the adoption and the enablement of certain services. So like in Saudi, there's Vision 2030. Anybody who wants to invest in fintech in Saudi, you need to read it. You need to see this is a target, this is something that I want to work on, and align yourself, and you'll see everyone in Saudis, again in the UAE and in Egypt, they all have these targets. But the disruption piece is not really something, especially with central banks, I don't think you should be playing this
I mean,
game.
I guess the focus should be on providing actual value as opposed to like just being a disruptor.
Exactly.
Noor, go ahead.
I agree. I don't think it's only with the fintech sector. I think the same is true for health tech, for manufacturing and supply chain disruption, if you will. We're very fortunate that the leadership in this part of the world has these 10-year plans and these visions of 2030 and 2033, and each one has their own. So it's not very difficult to read that and align with, yes, this is where there's a lot of tailwind, this is where the regulator is going to be friendly, and then where does that overlap with where I desire to create value? And with that business model, you're very likely to get support. But if you do come in and say, I want to disrupt, and you haven't really done the homework on where is this industry headed. And to go back to what I said briefly earlier, many of these industries are being created as we speak. So whether it's fintech, whether it's health tech, whether it's ed tech, education, we have 43% of the region currently in school in terms of our population. It's the highest in the world. Globally, the average is 27% of any population is in school. 43% of our population is in school right now. So what we do in education is paramount to the future of the next 20, 30, 40 years of the region, because these kids are graduating. So if you go into an ed tech or an education regulator and say, I see the challenge you have, I see what you're trying to solve for, here's a solution, you will get support. And I think that's the way to approach it in this part of the world.
So we're running out of time, but let's look to the road ahead. Again, for what are you as an investor looking at? And Islam, I will come from the entrepreneur's perspective. How can they make the best out of getting the right investors on track? So yeah, first you, as an investor, what are you looking at? What are you keeping an eye out for? Yeah.
Well, as investors, we look at everything. We're Series A investors, so once companies have a couple $1 million in revenue and they're looking to scale, that's generally where we come in. And we partner with founders for a good 5, 7, 10 years, however long it takes to enable them to achieve their vision and their missions. Sectors that are exciting, we write about sectors all the time on our website. We just published a big report on digital health. We did one 5 years ago. We've done another one just 2 weeks ago. And where it's come in the last 5 years, where we expect it to go. We're excited about supply chain management and really optimization of supply chains. We're very excited about agri-tech, thinking through food security. So we import 85% of our food as a region. I don't think that's going to be the case in 5 years. I think that number goes down drastically. Who's going to work on doing that? So these are the areas and sectors amongst many others that get us excited.
Islam, notes for the entrepreneurs in the room, yeah.
So I always a lot of people start with a solution. I think you need to start with a problem. Like we've never envisioned that we'll be in this business if it weren't for the first failed startup that we started. So I think you need to start somewhere, think of a big market, and by definition of big, I always like to say if we have 1% market share of the industry that we're building, that we are in, we'll be like a $7-8 billion company. So if you are attacking a big problem, you don't need to be 70% market share to build a big company. I think obviously this is something that's going to be extremely important in your fundraising. Pick the right investors. I can say this, we're very fortunate because we have amazing investors. Obviously, go mention.
He's not just saying that because she's here. Yeah.
And
I'm wondering now.
And actually, great investors help you actually. So we had global in our Series A. However, when we wanted to do Series B, actually global were the ones introducing us to some of their LPs, some of their partners. So when you start with great investors, you continue getting some A kind of players in the VC world, and you get extremely valuable expertise. I've seen a lot of VCs pushing some founders and friends to the ground by making them focus on wrong metrics, top line, grow, again, sell $1 for 80 cents, and we're going to do a fundraise. I was always being pushed to bottom line, EBITDA. I was always being pushed to what are the cohorts, look at what value are we creating, regardless how small, before we actually expedite and raise big funds. So this is extremely important. And the third thing is the team. So I mean, it's not a one-man show. It's very hard to build a big company by yourself. So I was extremely fortunate of having a team, not only extremely talented and some of the smartest people I've seen, but people who share the same values that you share. So again, you need to have the same definition of success. Success is not just having the biggest fundraise or the most valuable. Success is delivering value to the community, to the economies that we operate in. So we're always, as a team, when we're doing decisions, we're always aligned when it comes to ethics, values, and what to do and what to not do. And I think this is extremely fortunate. And the last thing is that if you don't see yourself doing what you're doing now for the next 10, 15 years, don't bother. Like, do something else.
That's fair. I'm gonna wrap up, but just two questions because they're interesting and focused on very challenging thing. Islam, you said something about like getting the right people in your team. Ayutayo is asking like it is a challenge to get talent. What's your like one step or two tips that you would give them?
So for us, obviously, it's a huge challenge, especially at the beginning, because at the beginning you want to have senior people and you want to have super smart senior people, and those guys most probably are working in very important places and they're getting paid very well. And I think as a founder or the founding team, the most important part of your job is not actually selling the company to clients, but mostly selling the company to these people who will actually come with you and build. So for me, my hardest sales pitches were not for our clients, it's for the early people, early believers who came in, who actually took pay cuts, who actually believed in the company, so they took equity. One of our VP for engineering had a job offer from Google, and he declined to come work for 6 months. He used to be making in EGP like $200 a month. Obviously, he got equity, but at this point it was worthless. So you need people who believe in this, and actually it's a good filter. If people at the beginning are asking you for like big salaries, they're not coming here to stay, because I mean, if a company has $500,000, you won't pay like 200, 300 of those for a chief commercial or a CTO. So.
Yeah. Make it worth their while. Noor, last question, and I have to stop. From Hannah, what do you recommend for female tech founders in terms of approaching investors? She says it is always a shock when it comes as a female founder, reaching out to investors. Yeah, notes for her. You've been through this yourself, so you can talk to it.
I think that the gender disparities is most notable in the quantum of dollars, right? So about 2.5% of venture capital dollars in the world are managed by women, and about 15% of venture funding goes to female-led startups. So I don't think we can escape that. I think the only advice I have is find investors that understand the problem you're trying to solve. So if you're solving a femtech problem, find lady investors. If you're solving a problem in supply chain or agritech, find investors that come from those industries. Right? So I think that it's really about people that understand the problem, that understand the industry, that can resonate with the size of the problem, the creative solution you're building, and go there. And I, in my career, have been gender blind, and that has really been, I think, what's helped me ignore the disparity. But I just think ignore the disparity, don't lean into it, and find the person best suited to the problem you're solving. And my advice for all women is solve large problems. I think that's the biggest disparity in the male versus female entrepreneurs we see, is that female entrepreneurs focus on problems that they're surrounded by, which is normal, but the problems they're surrounded by often are not as large and scale as the problems that men are surrounded by, it seems. And so if you're solving for a smaller TAM, you're less likely to get any investor, male or female. So pick a problem that you are familiar with that is incredibly large. Don't be only looking at problems that affect your surrounding directly that are small.
Look for big problems, people. I have to stop. I'm really sorry. I'm already 5 minutes off my track, but thank you all for your questions. We'll be around, I guess.
Yes, of
yeah,
course.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.